What is left of the rear section of the general cargo ship Wakashio is still lodged on the reef off the tropical island of Mauritius. Salvage operations began in February 2021, but have been abandoned due to bad weather. The wreck of this Japanese cargo ship will be remembered for decades as one of the greatest catastrophes ever to strike the small island nation. A disaster made worse by poor management by the authorities.
On the 6th of August, the worst happened. Oil was poured into our lagoon. Heavy fuel oil. And it spread all over the coastline, onto the beach, onto the waterfront, all the way up north to a place called Rivière des Créoles.
We tend to say that the ocean, the sea, is in our DNA, us as Mauritians, because when we were on the waterfront, there were a lot of people that came and poured tears when they saw the oil that were into the sea, and that somehow translates the deep relationship that we Mauritians we have with our sea.
There are strict laws, which regulate oil spillage, and Mauritius was supposed to ratify the convention in 2016, protecting all the states against oil spillage, but Mauritius did not. Had Mauritius done that in 2016, we could have claimed a minimum of $60 million.
Not only did the Wakashio wreck lead to a devastating oil spill in one of the island's natural reserves, but it also set in motion a protest movement that rocked the nation. This is the story of the Wakashio disaster. This is Mauritius, one of the world's island paradises. With its central volcano and fertile plains, for centuries it produced sugar and textiles for the world. With a population of just 1.3 million, it is known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, as it sits astride the routes from Africa to the Orient. The MV Wakashio, operated by Mitsui O.S.K. and owned by the Maritime Corporation, left Singapore on the 17th of July 2020. The 300-meter-long ship was on its way to Brazil. Its original plan was to sail north of the island, but the captain decided instead to head south. 8 days later, just as the sun was setting over Mauritius, the huge cargo ship crashed into the reef of Blue Bay.
Well, everybody said that there was a birthday on that ship, and according to information I've got from some confirmed sources, effectively there was one birthday celebrated on board the ship. I think it was the birthday of one of the engineers, third or fourth engineer.
By early morning, activist and freelance reporter Ruben Pillay was on the site.
Very early the next day, on Sunday morning, I was there before sunrise. I sent out the drone and I managed to have a good look at the ship. There was no damage to it. At that point, no one could imagine that it would become such an ecological catastrophe afterwards, because the ship appeared to be in good condition. It was not broken, it was just lying there on the reefs, surrounded by water and waves crashing up against it. It was actually a beautiful sight to behold.
The ship had literally rammed up on the reef, but the heavy swell was to dislodge it and move it again. What happened remains the subject of speculation. Was there a party on board that distracted the crew? Or are there other reasons why the ship might have sailed so close to shore? Alain Malherbe is a career captain and directed his own shipping company until retirement.
When you look at the actual track of the Wakashio coming towards Mauritius, you can see that effectively the vessel was closing by the coast, but it is common practice for vessels, especially when you have crew which have remained on board for unexpected contract time, to close by the shore of any country they are sailing within the vicinity, to try to have a telecommunication, a telephone network, to catch a telephone network, because all these crew, they have mobile phones with roaming facilities. So getting in touch with a shore telecom service, it's easy for them to send quickly a small message to their relatives, just to tell them that they are okay, or to have some quick news.
The next day, the ship was on the rocks, and the Mauritian Coast Guard began evacuating the crew. The island nation was in the throes of the COVID pandemic lockdown. In a series of inexplicably sluggish reactions, the government sent the first Coast Guard on the 29th, 4 days later, to examine the state of the ship. On the far side of the world, a phone call to Salvage, one of the foremost salvage companies in the world, activated a couple of tugboats that arrived on the 31st of July, 6 days after the crash.
On the 25th of July, when the Wakashio wrecked itself, there should have been booms placed all around the vessel, so that in any case of oil spillage, or potential oil spillage, at least it will be contained only around the Wakashio. But obviously this has not been done. It was not about following protocols. It was about working towards the best interest of the country. And the best interest of the country at that very moment was to have a contingency plan to prevent any oil spillage. This was not been done. I think that this was not in the mindset of the one in power.
Well, the first error, which I said, the first error they made, that they did not put the boom around the ship. That was the first mistake. And the second mistake was, well, this is not really the responsibility of the Coast Guard or the Ministry of Environment, is that the salvors, they filled up the ship at the hatch number 9 with water, which increased the pressure on the stern part of the ship, and which made that crack.
On the 5th of August, pictures started emerging on the internet, showing that the ship had started to sink, that the waterline was very close to the topmost part of the stern, giving the impression that the rear part of the ship had started sinking a bit. And the Minister of Fisheries came and said that the pictures had been manipulated, that they were fake, and that the situation was under control.
The constant rolling of the waves and twisting of the hull began ripping open a crack along the deck and then down the hull itself. In these still images taken on the 6th of August, 12 days after the grounding, we see the crack in the hull from which the first oil slicks are beginning to leak.
We were kind of following what was happening in Maibo and Pointe from the 25th of July itself, when the Wakashio wrecked on the reef there. And we had news, I would say, mostly around probably the 4th of August 2020, that the possibility of an oil spillage was imminent. And on the 6th, when unfortunately this happened during the day, so we consulted different comrades from our political party. And at some point, David Salvage, one of the members of our committee of the party, he came up with the idea of the booms confection. So he said that we needed to act now at that very moment because we felt that the government was not acting in the best interest of the ecosystem there, in the best interest of the people, in the best interest of the country itself for some reason.
Now, we need to understand the situation at that time of the people living there. Our nation is largely dependent on tourism to survive. The people living in the coastal regions, they are fishermen, they live from tourism. If they are not fishermen, they are boat operators, they are tour operators, they work in the tourism sector.
The people of Mauritius rallied to the call to save their beaches and put extraordinary inventiveness into action.
Irrespective of our religion, irrespective of our faiths, irrespective of our color of skin, irrespective of our of the job that we do, of our positions, everybody all around the island came together and worked together, and we started to make booms. It was an initiative of a political party called Résistance et Alternative, which means resistance and alternative, and they had the idea of making a boom to stop the progression of oil slicks on the surface of the water.
The booms were made out of sugarcane straw, and which is widely available here in Mauritius. And it was made also of green nets that we use on construction site, which is widely available here in Mauritius as well. And it was so the net was stuffed with those sugarcane straw, and also with empty plastic bottles that was used as floaters.
So the entire Mauritian nation came together, and in several places, everywhere there was sugarcane fields, people were picking up the dried leaves, and people were starting to make booms, and trucks were used to take the booms from those locations all the way down to the southeastern coast, and people were installing it on the side on the coast, along the entire coastline. And other volunteers got into suits and went down right into that oil and started scraping the oil out and putting them into drums. And we were working together.
Hundreds and hundreds of meters of this natural, protective and low-cost material were deployed up and down the lagoon.
We started the first boom confection on the Maibo waterfront. It was around midnight, and we ended. It was I would say maybe 3:30 in the morning of the 7th of August 2020, and we tested the first prototype. It was around 4 a.m. and 3 comrades from Maibo that joined us in this journey. So they entered the cold water at 4 a.m. and we placed the first boom, and surprisingly it worked very well, in the sense that well, the first thing, it floated. The second thing, it also contained the oil that was in the water, and the third thing that we saw, it also kind of retained the oil that came in.
However, anger was growing in the local population.
The government, that did nothing to prevent this in the first place, they didn't see things the same way as we did. And they started calling us insignifiant in our local language. This means insignificant. And people started getting very angry at the way that the government handled this situation, because for 12 days they did not do anything.
What we organized was not only we organized from the waterfront, but the booms were placed at different places. And the interesting thing is We work with people, drones operators like you, and who helped us to map the different sea current so that we are more efficient in the placement of the booms.
The police intervened, and the Environment Minister defined the protesting locals as a nuisance. Little did they know that the Coast Guard had professional equipment lying in a warehouse in Port Louis, the capital city, on the other side of the island. As the local population mobilized, tensions with the government grew, and the police became increasingly repressive. The environmental catastrophe was made worse by the location of the wreck. Here, just off Pointe is a unique nature reserve, famed the world over for its marine flora and fauna. The location of the grounding is close to two internationally protected sites. One for wetlands, especially mangrove forests, and a small coral atoll that had been set aside from human interference for the recovery of endemic species of Mauritius's rich and rare biodiversity. These images from the Sentinel-2 satellite show the different consistencies of the oil, from very thick in blue to light in yellow. The oil tested showed it was very low sulfur fuel oil.
So IMO, International Maritime Organization, with all the petrol suppliers, I think it was back in 2000, I think, they started to work on a new product, and then they agreed on the product which was manufactured, a special product called the VSLO, very low sulfur fuel oil. What happened effectively with the Wakashio, when she loaded that product in Singapore, the master, which is the current language, the captain of the ship was informed that there could be some risk of the engine running out of control, or even risk of explosion in the main engine.
The fuel loaded aboard the Wakashio seems to have played a key role in the ship's engines stopping just at the wrong moment.
When the Wakashio left the Malacca Strait and turned into a southerly direction on the route to go to Brazil, that was the initial route of Wakashio. On the 17th of July, the Wakashio had the first engine failure. In the meantime, the product was being analyzed both by the suppliers and by the owners of the ship. And when the owners received the actual result coming from the laboratory saying that effectively the product was of a very bad quality, that was on the 23rd of July. So he sent a mail to the ship informing the master to double up precaution, to double up surveillance on the main engine, because that product was very bad, and the ship herself and the crew, of course, were in danger because anything could happen.
The course of the Wakashio, from the time it left the Malacca Straits headed towards Brazil, was unusual. Sailing further southwards, the ship made a turn to the right just as the master received news of the poor quality of the fuel it was burning.
The captain of the ship said that he called the Coast Guard and he called the port control in Mauritius for assistance, that he got no reply. And as from that moment, the engine were not running anymore, except the generators which were producing electricity, but the main engine driving the vessel was completely out of order.
The new course headed straight towards the Mauritius town of Maibur, but no one seemed to notice.
The station at Pointe du Diable, I think we were talking of station at Pointe du Diable, they are all equipped with a radar, the conventional radar, and with the AIS as well. So if he sees a dot on the radar which he cannot guess what it is, if he looks at his screen of AIS, he will immediately see which ship it is, what's the direction of the ship, what's the speed of the ship, and where the ship is exactly, longitude, latitude, and the distance from the shore.
Had the course not been changed again, just 2 hours before the crash, the disaster would have been much worse, with the ship breaking through the narrow reef.
Having been again in that industry for quite a long time, I've been sailing quite a long time on ships, on very long sea passages. I have never come across any ship's captain or ship's crew putting down their VHF radio while sailing, because we must keep in mind that a VHF radio is also a safety equipment which can save a life. So no mariner will sail with a VHF radio with the volume down, as the police said, or with the VHF radio off. This is impossible.
Why the Wakashio crashed into the reef of southeastern Mauritius is not the only mystery surrounding this wreck.
Having been in that industry for 43 years, I can imagine that the captain thinking that better to run the ship aground if any problem arises, instead of going along the initial track towards Brazil and have an engine failure in the middle of the ocean where there would be no recourse to save them. So this, to my point of view, is one of the main reasons why the Wakashio came closer to Mauritius. When we saw that the engine went down to 0 RPM, you know very well that during July we have heavy swells and very strong winds coming from the south-southeast. So that current and that wind has been pushing up the vessel towards the reef. So it is not an intentional grounding.
The incredible inefficiency of the Mauritian authorities is inexplicable. Experts were flown in from France and Japan, despite the whole island being quarantined, to attempt to save the situation from getting worse. By the 10th of August, the crack looked like this, and the Coast Guard helicopters were desperately trying to remove the fuel before yet more spilled into the lagoon.
People were at a loss. We didn't understand why there was this ship there, and at the same time was revealed to us by a member of Parliament. He was in the opposition party, and he published pictures of oil handling equipment that we had in the port area. So Mauritius had all this equipment, and we were supposed to have people trained to use that equipment. This was supposed to be contingencies in case such an incident, an oil spill, would happen in the port area, but they did nothing. The first thing that ought to have been done was, okay, we've got a ship that crashed there. We go out and we install booms all around the ship, so if there is any oil spill, it is contained right then and there before it reaches the coast. But they didn't do that. Why? Beats me. Nobody can explain. The government cannot explain why they didn't do anything.
The wreck had settled on the reef and interrupted the natural currents in the lagoon, creating an enormous sandbank that people approaching the ship could stand on. The wreck now interfered with the geology of the lagoon too. By the 15th of August, just 3 weeks after the crash, the 250-metre-long bow section of the ship had broken off completely. The salvors said they now had no option but to sink it offshore. The government announced that it would be scuttled out to the southeast of the island. But before this could happen, it had to be sanitized. The credibility of the government was sinking too, but rather than engage with the people, a climate of fear began growing after acts of repression.
The scrap value of the ship was around approximately 400 tons, $400 per ton. So if you try to work on a rough estimate of that ship, if they say that there is 7,000 tons left when she cracked, when the bow was sunk, so that ship was, I think, 30,000 tons. So 23,000 tons were sank for nothing. Now, if you multiply 23,000 tons by $400 per ton, that would have been a very good revenue for the country.
Amid protests by local environmentalists and in utmost secrecy, the bow section of the ship was towed out to sea on the 24th of August. In the amazing satellite analysis made by the AI company Windward, we see how the salvors changed their mind as to where the bow section should be sunk. The two Smith ships, the Borka Expedition and Borka Summit, as well as the Indian Navy ship INS Nirikshak, at first towed the carcass southeastwards, as these satellite photographs show. Reuben Pillay followed in a private boat in high seas, risking life and limb.
We went out to the heavy seas, several kilometers out of the island. It was pretty scary, and it was very heavy waves, and the boat was going up and down. We were dumping off the crest of waves down to 3 meters, and we managed to see the actual bow of the ship being towed to the place where they've been wanting to scuttle it.
The ship was eventually sunk northeast of Mauritius. According to the salvors, no explosives were used, and the bow section sank when it was filled with water.
At the end of the day, it proved very difficult for them to sink that ship. They were using fire hydrants on the tugboats to throw water into the empty ship, and they filled it with water, hoping that it would sink under the weight. But for several days, it just wouldn't sink. So at some point, we're questioning. There is a question as to whether they used explosives or not to pierce a hole at the bottom of the ship so that it would sink. But we have no information on that.
In the following days, Mauritians woke up to the tragic sight of dead and dying dolphins and melon-headed whales on their pristine beaches.
On the 25th of August, our worst fears materialized because melon-headed whales, which are a small species of whales that closely resemble dolphins, started washing up on the shores of Mauritius.
The Coast Guard and local authorities now tried to cover up the full extent of the catastrophe by hiding the remains of the dolphins and whales. But the activists scoured the coastline for the cetaceans and filmed these terrible scenes.
the fishermen had been told for several hours to use a machine, a bobcat, to lift up the dolphins and put them in the truck so that the truck can go, and traces of the dolphins would have disappeared. But they didn't want that from happening. They asked me to come there, and they said, come and film, show the world what is going on in our village, show them what this government is doing. And this is what I did. I started filming, and it was then, after filming, that they agreed to lift up the dolphins and put them on the truck, and I filmed the process. But even as I was doing so, a policeman came and told me and asked him if I was of the press. I said no, and then he showed me the way out, and he said, I'm not allowed to film here.
The natural disaster had now spread to the deep Indian Ocean. What had happened to cause these marine mammal deaths? Ruben Pillay decided to find out.
And then later that day, we took a boat and we went into the sea near the reefs, where we had heard the Coast Guard were trying to push the dolphins, the melon-headed whales, away from the coast. And we saw a pod of whales, melon-headed whales. They are small whales, maybe 200 of them, all of them behaving very erratically. We saw a baby dolphin dead in the water. We met another team of fishermen in a boat, and they said that this one had just died. So what we did at this point, we picked up the body and we put it into the boat.
Once the dead baby whale was collected, the activists continued their search for answers in the lagoon.
I wanted to find out what had happened to that baby whom we named Baby Brody. And as we went further up into the sea, and we saw what the other fishermen in the other boat said was the mother of Baby Brody, and she had been accompanying the baby until the baby died, and she was in a very stressed state. She was swimming on only one flipper. Half her body was down was on the side in the water, and she was turning around in circles, and she was letting out this sorrowful sound of, it was like she was mourning. And right before our eyes, this mother died. She took upon a vertical position into the water. Only her head was out of the water, and we did not know. We were helpless.
In the meantime, Ruben wanted to find out more, flying his drone up and down the coastline. The exact number of dolphins and whales that died will never be known, but at least 50 have been counted. Once again, the government attempted to cover up the extent of the disaster.
And I found a fisherman who had agreed to keep Baby Brody in a freezer in his house. He was, of course, very afraid to do it.
A veterinary surgeon was called in to supervise via WhatsApp an autopsy on the dolphin recovered from the Mauritian beach. What they found out was incredible.
We managed to get in touch with a group of people from abroad. One guy, a French guy, who was specialized in animal necropsies. So he guided us, a team of people here, actually two people here, me and some other person who doesn't want to be named, and we cut the animal open. We were doing this through a WhatsApp call. It lasted more than 6 hours, and we did a necropsy of dead baby Brody. And before we opened up baby Brody, the man told us what we should expect to find.
Ruben Pillay was looking for evidence that the death of baby Brody and dozens of cetaceans had something to do with the sinking of the bow of the Wakashio.
He said that if it was an explosion that frightened the dolphin, if it was the sonar of the bathymetric survey that frightened the dolphins, their death would have been caused by rapid resurfacing, which is called a decompression sickness. And if that is the case, we would see bubbles of air on the sacs surrounding their organs in the body of the animals. And this is exactly what we saw when we opened up baby Brody.
Somehow, the whales had risen to the surface too fast, causing nitrogen bubbles to form in their bloodstream. The scars on their faces show they swam into the reefs without seeing them with sonar.
The government had conducted a survey, a bathymetric scan, which uses sonar in connection with the Wakashio there on the 22nd of August. And 3 days later, the melon-headed whales started washing up dead on the coast.
The salvers sank the Wakashio bow not only in a whale spawning area, but also in the center of sea currents that will carry debris and pollutants in the direction of Réunion and Mauritius for decades to come. An inexplicable error. The tragedy that surrounds the Wakashio does not end here. At the end of August 2020, the Mauritian authorities decided to speed up the extraction of fuel oil from the carcass of the Wakashio's stern. One of the tugs used to tow fuel barges was the Sir Gaëtan, filmed here alongside the wreck.
There was a barge that was involved in the salvage operation, and an order was given by the port authorities for a tug, an old rusted tug, the Sir Gaëtan, to go and fetch that barge. And the weather wasn't good. An accident occurred, and the tugboat sank. Some people on board managed to survive, but 4 did not.
The tug Sir Gaëtan is a very old tug. I don't remember her age. And everybody knows in the port, including the director of shipping, who has the power to arrest any vessel not having the adequate certificate to sail out of a port. That specific tug was an old one, badly maintained, with no certificates at all, so that tug wasn't seaworthy. So even though human beings were sent on that tug to their death.
It seems from these images recovered by the divers who filmed during the underwater removal of the ship's fuel that the barge crashed into the tugboat, slicing a hole in the hull below the waterline and possibly throwing the crew members overboard. It was a national tragedy.
Divers were sent down there to find out what happened and to recover evidence. And pictures were posted on the Indian Navy page. It was upon digging into that Indian Navy page that I found those pictures of the sunken Sir Gaetan, and I managed to have a good look at the crack of the Sir Gaetan. I was able to match the picture of the crack and the actual the position of the bullets on the barge.
We entered another level of engagement via what I will call the social mobilization. So the first important one after the Wakashio was on the 29th of August in the capital city of Pointe, where we have like over 100,000 of people that were on the street it was, I would call it most of an outcry of the population of Mauritius against the way that this was handled by the government.
The Sir Gaetan disaster was the worst loss of life in the whole Wakashio wreck incident. 4 men lost their lives trying to save Mauritius's shoreline. And public opinion was increasingly turning against the government. In the meantime, the protests on the island were growing. The government's lazy response to the wreck, its inability to handle the oil spill, and the slow arrest of the captain spread anger among the local population, who filled the streets of the capital, Port Louis, on the 29th of August. Under pressure from these massive protests, the government now decided to arrest the captain and investigate what had actually happened.
On the 29th of August, we protested. More than 60,000 people, Mauritians, flooded the streets of Port Louis in protest against that government. Because we were not happy in the way that the Wakashio situation was dealt with. We were not happy that they sunk the front portion of the ship and caused the death of the dolphins. There were also several other issues.
In November 2020, the Mauritian government appointed the Chinese salvage company Lian Yong'an Dali Underwater Engineering to remove the wreck. But it was not until the 15th of February 2021 that they began work cutting up the stern of the ship. They brought in the crane barge Hong Bang 6, one of only 3 of its kind in the world.
Initially, they said it would take three to 4 months. This is what was said. But now we are closing to 1 year now, because we are nearly end of the year, closing end of the year. So February, the Hong Bang was there. We will be February very soon. And the Wakashio is still there. So I think we are going for at least two more years.
The semi-submersible barge Shin Chuan Ha travelled with the crane to collect the parts removed that were then taken all around the island to Port Louis, where they were decontaminated. The Mauritian authorities have still failed to carry out an investigation into what actually happened that fateful night. The voyage data recorder has still not been examined to explain the changes of course, and the trial of the captain and crew has only just begun. The Wakashio incident had become the symbol of something that wasn't right in this island paradise. And what actually happened that night may never be known. Too many unexplained events seem to make this into one of the most absurd shipwrecks of all time.